Hello and welcome to another tutorial. This tutorial is going to be covering basic use of Adobe Illustrator, and I'm going to be using this tutorial to show you specifically the image trace tool. Okay, so if you have trouble creating images and things like that using the mouse, what you can do is you can use freehand drawings or other elements to create vectors, okay? And I'll be explaining what vectors are as well, okay? So open up Adobe Illustrator. If it's at this stage, all you need to make sure is that you're able to make a new document, okay? So, just go to print, just grab a portrait A4 document and you can get started. So as long as you can do that. Okay, let's skip that tool. Okay, and so if you're in this area now, what I first want you to do is have a quick play around with the tools that are available to you. Okay, so there is a rectangle tool here. Let's just grab this for now. So vector is essentially related to paths. Okay, so a vector is essentially a position from A to B. Okay, that's essentially what it means. Okay, and really a rectangle is, if we start here, you have to get all the way across a path to get back to there to make a whole shape. It's the same with a circle as well. If you were to make a circle, it would have different points that make up the path. Okay. Now, if I was to illustrate how this works in a bit more detail, how essentially drawing works in a bit more detail, let's take the pen tool. Okay, so it's right here, pen tool. You can press P to get it if you're lazy, and you can click once, and that makes an anchor point, and it's your first point in your vector path. Just try and create a simple triangle. Okay, you've made 2 more points at this point in time. Hover over the first anchor and you'll notice that a little circle has popped up on your cursor. Okay, now that is essentially turning that vector path into one whole shape. Okay, but obviously there are tools here that simply allow you to make a simple vector path that doesn't turn itself into a shape. Okay, so it's an easy way to make some simple images and things like that by using shapes. There are other aspects as well. So for example, I can click, make a pen point and anchor, but then before I click the next anchor point, I'm going to hold the button as I do it and drag, and you'll see what that does. That changes the trajectory of the vector using these handles. Okay, you can change the direction of them and the amount of curve that you add. Okay, this will lead on in the next point that you make as well. It will carry that on, but once you click on that, there's no addition added there. Okay, so say for example, if I wanted to make a whole circle or circle-like object, I would have to think about that before I go about finishing off. Okay, so you can see essentially what that does. All right, so let's just have a quick experiment trying to make a circle with only the pen tool. Okay, so stop the video and have a go yourself. Best way of doing it is essentially to always click and drag. Okay, so there you go. There's a simple shape there that I was able to make. Okay, so we'll perhaps use this shape as we try and explore some other illustration options that we have. Okay, so for example, if I wanted to turn this into a face, I might want to consider changing this object in some way. Okay, at the moment it only has 4 points. If I was to grab the pencil tool, or press N if you'd like, the pencil tool essentially allows me to freehand draw. Okay, you can do this very easily using just the mouse or a tablet if you are using it. Okay, if we have this object selected and then we then we have the pen tool again, use the black mouse to select the whole object and then the pencil tool, you can actually draw directly on this shape further. So look at this asterisk. This asterisk disappears for a moment. That means that you're going to interact with the path that you have there. So let's just play around with that for a brief moment. Bring it around like that. Yep. So before you know it, what you've been able to do is manipulate that shape so it's no longer a circle. Now it's a little bit, what's the word? Unsymmetrical at this point in time, but that's perfectly fine. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my skills to create a simple skull shape. Let's go ahead and do that. So I can do that very simply. By playing around with the shapes I've got. So I've got one shape there. There you go. It's not perfect, but I've got that now. I'm going to use a simple circle tool to create the rest of the object. Okay. It's a fairly stylized skull. I didn't really think about what I was going to produce before I went about doing it, but I quite like this. I think this is pretty good. Okay, so I've got that. I've got these objects. Okay, at this point in time, let's look at the properties here. Okay, you have, in your own time, maybe stop for a moment, actually make some shapes so that you can play around with this further. But once you've done, carry on. We're going to carry on now. So the appearance for all of these is a white fill, and a black stroke of 1 point. Okay, I have everything selected, so I can perhaps increase that and you'll be able to see what that does. Okay, so one thing I can do is change the stroke width. Okay, I'll leave it at 1 point, and I'll actually leave it black as well. But the fill might need to change. So for example, if I was to select this object here, I could change the fill to a black. Okay, that's done that nicely, and then perhaps do the same with that one as well. Okay, here, just add that in. Finally there as well. Okay, so I've got a simple shape here. If I was to select this as well, I could perhaps change that to a grey colour. Okay. Now, one thing you could perhaps think about is stylizing, having your own personal style. So personally, what I like to do is actually get rid of strokes. I don't necessarily like them. I like just using vectors on their own and seeing what I can do. Okay. Those are some basic illustration techniques that we've looked at. What have we looked at? We've looked at using the pen, we've looked at using shape objects, and we've looked at using the pencil. Okay, we're going to explore some others, but in the meantime, what I want you to do is stop and have an experiment, have a play around with those tools, okay, and get something that you're kind of happy with. And in the meantime, I'm going to get rid of this. I don't need this anymore. Okay, now, before we explore some of the other tools, we're going to explore one really, really useful aspect, and that is the image trace option. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to essentially get an image that you can use. Okay, now I'll explain that in a bit more detail. So for example, I have provided you with a little document that shows shot types, and that will give you an opportunity to just take a picture of one of them, and you can essentially then use that picture, that image. Okay, and all this is to illustrate that you can turn, say, this image into vector itself and use that in a similar way than what we've done, so far. Okay, so I can take that image. Now that it's downloaded, I can find it in my downloads. I can drag and drop that in here. Okay, it's quite big. So what you want to do is make sure you have the black mouse selected, and you can go for it. Now at the moment, I'm just having a little bit of problem because I don't have the right thing selected, but I want to be able to zoom out. You can do that by pressing Control or Command for a Mac and the minus key. So plus and minus live right next to the 0 key on the long set of numbers on your main keyboard. Okay, so Command plus zooms in, Command minus zooms out. Okay. Now with that tool selected, you will be able to hover your mouse over and change the rotation of the object. Okay. So if you actually wanted to keep it at 45-degree angles, you hold down Shift and you can essentially work within that constraint. Okay, and that's pretty much with anything. If you hold down Shift, for example, to change the scale, it will stay the height and width together. Otherwise, you have full control and you'll lose control. So let's grab that and just pop that there for now. Okay, let's zoom in as well. Okay, so we have at this point in time an object. You're not able to affect this in any way because it's not vector. It is a bitmap. If you were to zoom in, you'll be able to see that there are there's an element of pixelation going on. You zoom in right in, you can see the pixels at play there. What we're going to do is we're going to turn this into vector so that it's not affected by pixels in any way anymore. Okay, you've got some options down here. You've got image trace, and that's the one that we're going to be using. Okay, now your version of Illustrator may be different, and image trace may be up the top. There may be other things at play here, but what I want you to do is I want you to go to your window settings up here and choose image trace as a window. That will allow us to essentially look at lots and lots of different aspects and manually create our image trace options. If I wasn't to do that, if I was to just click image trace, I would have these set presets essentially, and essentially they're not necessarily going to work for me. So the nearest thing for what I want is silhouette. Let's have a look and see what that does. See, it's not ideal. It's not what I wanted to do. So I'm going to have to manually do that. Now I can go edit, undo. An easy way to do this would be to press Command Z. Okay? Now we're going to play around with these. We're going to click preview. Ignore this. It's just telling you that it's a big object. It's going to take a while to do it. Okay, that's actually worked quite nicely for us. Okay, and that's essentially different. Okay, you can change the threshold if you are having problems. What this will do is make the images more clearer, but it all depends on the quality of the picture that you've taken or the scan that you've taken, however you've gone about taking it, and the quality of the work itself. Okay, but that's perfectly fine for this process. So I'm gonna leave that there. The only other things I need to change at this point in time is this one. Ignore white. There are other things that you personally may want to change. Okay, for example, the method. Do you want a set of layers, so the black and the white as separate layers, one over the top of each other, or do you want them as cutouts? I almost always want them as cutouts, and I want to ignore the white because I want to add my own colors to it. So I'm just going to click that, and you can see by the gray areas here that we've got rid of all of the white. I'll move this along and you'll be able to see that. Yeah, we've only got the black lines at this point in time. So we need to tick off preview and actually click trace. Now without touching anything else, you need to find in your window somewhere the expand button. For me, in this version, it is here. I click expand and watch these lines. Once I do, they disappear. And what comes up in its place is outlines around all of your image. Okay, so that's letting me know that the image is made up of vector paths. Okay, and if we were to press the white mouse at this point in time and zoom in, you'll be able to see what that means. So all of these vector anchor points and things like that we've talked about before are here. Now the white mouse, as separate to the black mouse, is allowing us, if I click it correctly, if you click one separate anchor point, is allowing us to move anchor points separately. Whereas if I was to grab just the black tool, it takes whole shapes. So that whole side of his nose is one shape. It's one pen mark. Yeah. So essentially, you won't be able to manipulate that separately unless you have that white mouse. Okay. What I want you to do is I want you to take a few moments to use this white mouse, if need be, and the rubber to just clear up your work area. Okay, so say for example here, I've got lots of things that I don't need. So I can increase my, my brush on my rubber here, that's the eraser tool. I can do that by hitting the brackets just underneath the plus and minus keys. You've got the brackets here. They increase the size of your brush. So I can then go about rubbing things out, which is great. Okay, and also here in this area, I have some bits that I want to clean up. So I've got a gap here. If I was to select this, I should be able to bring this out just so that it covers up, it overlaps. That way I don't have any gaps. Okay, so again here, this one might be a little bit more tricky, might not necessarily work that great, but that's the type of thing we want to do. Okay, so just pause the video and just spend a little bit of time cleaning up using the eraser and the white mouse itself. Okay. Okay. So now that you've done that, what you'll want to do is experiment with the paint options. Okay, there are two ways in which you can paint this object. Okay, one way is to just fill in the objects with a one-click system, and I'll show you how to do that. But the best way to do this is to actually paint on the layers underneath. Okay, so let's at least experiment with painting on layers underneath, because it allows us to talk about paints and it also allows us to talk about layers themselves. Okay, so you should be able to find your layer window. Okay, and if you can't find it, like with everything, you'll be able to find it in the window here. Okay, take the layers just so that you've got full access to it, because you're always going to want to be able to see your layers, and open it up. Okay, in the layer that you have, you'll see all of these different sub layers. These live in a group at this point in time, but you can at any point in time ungroup, but we don't necessarily need to. Okay, each and every shape, each and every object has its own sub layer. Okay, so if I was to click on that eye, I can actually see that that's there, and I've got an indicator that that's there. If I was to click on that bit, it's clearly our nose, and we're able to click on that and select that separately. Okay, but what we're going to do is we're actually going to lock this layer, because we don't want to affect this anymore, and we want to create a new layer. Pop that underneath, and let's get started in painting. Okay, now that this layer is locked, we can't affect it in any way, so we are painting on the layer underneath. Now, if I was to grab the paintbrush tool, that allows me to paint. The only problem with this is that the way in which it paints, it creates a path. Okay, it creates a single line that runs through the paintbrush. So if I was to use this to paint, just go along and start painting, paint. If I was to hover over that, you'll see it actually just creates a messy load of paths and stuff like that. That's the wrong way to use the paintbrush tool. Okay, the paintbrush is a line drawing tool. What you're going to want to use is the blob brush tool. Okay, now the difference being, if I was to increase the size of that, if I click that, you'll see that the path is on the outside. Okay, so that essentially creates fills. So let's start by changing the color. Have a realistic facial colour. I find it very difficult to find skin colours, to be honest with you. We'll go up there, we'll go with that. Okay, and to be honest with you, all it's about now is just starting to paint. Now, what you'll find is when you first paint, it is actually in grey, okay? That is because we have image traced, and it's through that image tracing we've actually changed our color settings, okay? So if you've got it up here, you can find the color that way, but otherwise you're looking for this area, the color window, okay? And essentially you need to be able to change your area so that it is at least RGB. So just do that, okay? And the colors magically appear and everything like that, okay? So you can get to painting. You can continue now. So just paint away and try and get to somewhere where you're happy with it. Now, one thing to take into account is if you go over the lines at this point in time, it doesn't matter, okay? Because you can just grab that eraser. Remember that our layer is locked, and you can clean that up, okay? So you can actually spend a bit of time creating something without worrying about going out of the lines, because you can just go back on yourself. So spend a little bit of time actually colouring in your object. Okay, so I've got my first layer there. It's not perfect. I'm sure you'll spend a bit more time actually doing it so it is perfect. You can make loads of different layers if you wanted to, just to, keep things organized, but we don't necessarily need to make any more layers. You can always delete layers, okay? But you can actually go in here and you can see the sub layer. So you've got one at this point in time, and that is that object, okay? Just to illustrate a little bit further, let's change the color and try a different color. So I can double click that. I can bring in, say, a brownish color. And I can, say, paint the eyebrows. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in so I can be more accurate. Hold down space to essentially use the hand tool. That's very useful. And continue. Now, the beauty of painting on the layer underneath is that you can essentially make it easy to add shading and things like that. So for example, I can add another tone of brown and essentially add some shadow effects or two-tone color to my work as well. Okay, we give it an extra level of depth. Okay, and at any point in time, these objects can be changed, so the color can be changed if you need to. Okay, that person can now be blonde if they wanted to be. Okay, so that's essentially it. That's one way of doing it. Okay, I'm going to hide this layer because we're not going to need this. What I wanted to show you finally was live painting. If you didn't have enough time to look at this in much detail, or if you weren't able to spend a lot of time painting something, then this would be the way to go. So unlock your layer and make sure you have all of this selected. Okay, use the black selection tool to make sure that that happens. Then you're going to want to go to Object, Live Paint, and click Make. Okay, I'm going to show you an alternative way of doing this as well. So I'm not going to click Make at this point in time, but you can just go ahead and click Make. If you want, you can click and hold on the Shape Builder tool, find the Live Paint Bucket tool, select that and hover over the object. You'll be able to see a preview of what this will do. This will make this into a live paint group, and what it's doing is selecting all of the shapes and all of the shapes in between the shapes, and it's going to create an area where you can just add fills and stuff. Okay, so if I just click that, it's turned his face into black. So just to illustrate very quickly, I should be able to paint that. But remember, it's gone to grayscale again. because we're on that dodgy layer. Okay, so once you've done that, you should be able to click again and it's going to come in. So I can really save some time by turning it into a live paint object. But one drawback of doing this aspect is that you can't, for example, break apart the object. You can't now paint, like, say, the eyes, unless you were to sort them out. Notice this one has gaps, this one doesn't. I cannot at this point in time add my own shading or things like that because it's made a live paint group with all of the lines, but also any sort of colors that I put in there as well. Okay, so yeah, you're quite limited in what you can do, but it's fairly easy to make a fill using that. So what I want you to do as a final piece of assessment is to have some experiments in Adobe Illustrator, play around with shapes, but most importantly use the image trace tool, create something perhaps using the image that I've provided or one that you can create yourself. Okay, thank you.